Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a video which is my favourite video of the year, which is my favourite books I read in 2025. I feel like it's always so fun to reflect back on the year and everything you've read and which ones you think are your favourites. And I also love seeing what everyone else has read and which ones they really love. So I've kind of put these in a ranking, but it's not too, it's kind of all there's my favourite read of the year and then kind of everything else that I've kind of put into some sort of order. So I'm going to save my best book till last. The first one I'm going to talk about is Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. This is kind of a historical fiction vampire novel which follows 3 women throughout history and how they're all linked and how their stories all converge at the end. I listened to it on audiobook and each character gets a different kind of audiobook narrator, which I feel like really differentiates them. It was a little bit long, I'll give it that, and it was, some parts did feel a bit drawn out and a bit longer than maybe they should have been or could have been, but I loved it. I loved getting so much detail about all of these characters and I loved seeing how all of their stories kind of come together at the end and in a way that I didn't really expect. But I also love that this kind of leans into that classic vampire, the kind of Anne Rice vampire that's very gothic and amoral, and also kind of the queerness. And this novel really uses vampires to look at queerness and lesbianism in women and using their vampirism as a way of empowerment, I feel like, and gaining agency, embracing and being empowered in their own sexuality. And I loved the kind of complicated relationships in this as well and the kind of moral ambiguity throughout. And then next up, one of my only physical reads is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. I read this right at the beginning of the year. I feel like this is such a classic, such a modern classic fantasy. I feel like everyone who knows anything about fantasy knows about this book and has heard about this book. So this is a high fantasy set in this Mistborn world. The magic system relies on metals and consuming metals and how the metals kind of work together to kind of create magic, use magic. It's a very unique magic system and we follow Vin. So this is set in a world where the Dark Ruler has basically he's basically won and there's kind of a rebellion brewing and Vin gets involved in this. We get some really interesting characters, we get interesting world building and a very interesting and unique magic system, as well as political intrigue and tension, which all kind of builds into the second book, I feel like. Also, we get a little budding romance in here, which I feel like it's such a well-rounded book. I loved Brandon Sanderson's writing and I can't wait to continue on with this series. I say even though I haven't continued on yet, but I feel like it's a winter series, so I'm going to continue on soon. I have the books right behind me as well, so they're all here. I have no excuse. And then next up I have Coffin Moon by Keith Rossin, which I read this because I was reading all of the nominees for the Goodreads Horror Choice Awards. And this one really took me by surprise because I'd never really heard of it and I wasn't expecting too much of it, but I actually really loved it. This is kind of a horror revenge story across America. Our main character, Dwayne, and his niece, Julia, are chasing after a vampire to get revenge. It's set in the 1970s, so it's kind of got that kind of historical setting and it's kind of got that historical setting to it. And I really loved this because we get this kind of action and horror kind of narrative, but we also get to see a lot about the characters and the kind of trauma they've gone through. The characters it's all quite sad, really. The characters go through a lot and they've been through a lot and you kind of see them dealing with that. And we kind of get all of their backstories, including John Varley, the vampire in the story. And we see his life before he was a vampire, how he's became a vampire, and what's going on as they're kind of tracking him down. So we kind of get his perspective as well, which I think gives that really interesting, unique kind of angle to it. And then we also follow Dwayne and Julia and we get to see their backstories. Dwayne is a Vietnam veteran, so he's dealing with the PTSD from that and all of the consequences of that. And also Julia has come from an abusive and broken household and she's dealing with all of things coming stemming from that. And I really loved that, and I really liked the way that we kind of include the way that grief and revenge and kind of regret are kind of all weaved into this story with this kind of horror action elements to it as well. It was a really unique kind of blend of everything, which I really loved. And then next up we have Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. I feel like I can't say too much about this book because it's a second in a series. It kind of follows on from the first book, but it also kind of takes the story in a different direction. And we also get characters from the first book kind of coming into this one. So this follows follows Emily Wilde, who is an academic in this fantasy world, and she's like studying fairies. Her kind of academic rival slash like annoying kind of colleague kind of gets involved in her like studies and her like adventures, and they get into like all of these different situations which are kind of funny. There's not too much of a threat, but I feel like sometimes I'm like, how have you got yourself in this situation, girl? Like the plots are kind of wild, but they're also really wholesome and like random and whimsical, but I love them. I love how whimsical and charming the characters are, and I just love the kind of wholesome whimsy of these books. It's not too deep, but they're just cozy and comforting, I think, especially for wintertime. And I'm really scared to pick up the last one because it's the end of the series, and that makes me sad. Next up, we have Kim Ji-young, born 1982. This is essentially like a fictionalized account of this woman's life, Kim Ji-young, who is kind of having like a mental breakdown, and we follow her and look at kind of her life from her childhood to present to see what has caused this and how this has come to be. This is such a searing and honest and critical look at the way that misogyny is endemic in Korean culture and the way that it affects women through generations. I think I read that this book was kind of like really applauded in Korea, especially as like a kind of examination of misogyny that women face. I won't talk too much about like the plot of what happens because it is quite a short book, and I feel like it takes it away if you kind of know what's happening. We don't look only at Ji-young's life, but we look at her kind of female family members and colleagues and the way that all of these things kind of work together. You can see the kind of like how it's kind of been passed down through generations, and the misogyny that was present in her mother's life and in her mother's life, and also like things within the workplace and just attitudes that people have. And I thought it was really well done and made me angry. So and then next up we have Play Nice by Rachel Harrison, which is a horror book. It is mostly about a haunted house and a lot about family dynamics. This follows Cleo, who is renovating the house that her mother used to live in after her mother's death. And she was estranged from her mother through her whole adult life after her mother claimed that the house was haunted and lost custody of the children. And since then, she kind of hasn't really spoken to her mother, and she's also dealing with a lot of the grief that comes with that. I really loved how we have the kind of scary horror scenes of the possession of the house and all of these kind of like seemingly haunted things going on, and Cleo starting to question what's real and what's not and whether her mother was right. But also we kind of see that mix of like grief and also like family drama. There's so much drama in this book between like Cleo and her like dad and her sisters, and I feel like it's so chaotic, but I really loved it, and I feel like it blended really well with the kind of horror and the way that the house was used to kind of explore all of these things. I thought the pacing was also really good in this, and it kept me so like compelled to see what was actually happening and what was going to happen with all the family drama. Like I was locked in for the family drama. I feel like this is one of my favorites from her because it just kind of blended everything so well. I also love Cleo as a character. She's kind of very flawed, but not unlikable enough that you're not invested in her life. But I love that about all of Rachel Harrison's characters. They all kind of have very real flaws that make them very like realistic and relatable in some ways. I feel like she really doesn't shy away from looking at people's flaws in these situations and in her characters. But yes, a new favourite from me for Rachel Harrison. Next up is Cursebound by Sarah El Arifi. This is the sequel to Faebound, which I read last year, and I really loved this one. I think I maybe even liked it more than the original. This is kind of a fantasy slash romantasy, and it's set in a world where the elves believe that the Fae and the humans are extinct and don't really realise they're there. So we kind of have our main characters. We follow our main characters who are outcast from the elven world and accidentally discover the Fae world, start to uncover why the Fae are trapped and all of the things that kind of go along with that. One of my favourite things about this is how just it's the world is very queer and that's just accepted and very normalised in this. It's not like a thing, it's just very, very accepted, and I love reading about worlds like that, and I feel like it makes it a very refreshing read from all of the kind of cut and paste romanticities that are out there. And I really love how we get more development in this novel, different relationships, and we also get a new point of view which kind of progresses the plot along, I think, nicely towards the third book where things should be concluding. There's drama from past lovers, and there's more political tension and drama kind of building, which I feel like makes me really excited for the third book. And then next up I have We Could Be Rats by Emily R. Austin. Emily Austin is one of my favorite authors. I feel like her novels are also underrated. This is a contemporary lit fic novel. I just want to preface this with the fact that this whole book is written as a series of attempts at writing a suicide note. So our main character Sigrid is writing primarily, I think, to her sister Margot and trying to explain what's happened and how she's come to this point of her life. It feels very much like a stream of consciousness, and I feel like it's a really unique kind of way of doing it if it doesn't trigger you. Emily Austin does this a lot, where she'll take quite dark topics and make them humorous while also kind of not taking away the severity of it, but just using that as a way to like explore these deeper themes and feelings that people have, and the way that her characters are kind of struggling with different things in their life. It's not in such a humorous but like a heart-wrenching and heartwarming at times, where we see this character going through all of these things, explaining her feelings of isolation and loneliness and outrage at the world and its injustices, and kind of struggling to adapt to adulthood. I feel like if you're at all neurodivergent, I feel like Emily Austin's books, her characters, I feel like really convey that sense of finding it hard to adjust to the kind of things that are just generally accepted in the world. I also really love how we look at the kind of like sister relationship between Sigrid and Margot, and how it's not always so. It looks at the kind of like difficulties between them and the struggles that they have, and ultimately how, despite those things, the relationship is still important. Overall, this is one of my favourites from Emily Austin, and I really loved it. And next up, my runner-up / second favourite book is Blood on Her Tongue by Joanna Van Veen. This is a kind of historical horror gothic tale, which is kind of a take on vampires. It's set in the 1800s, I believe. It follows twin sisters, Lucy and Sarah. And Lucy receives a note from Sarah stating that she is unwell, and she has become obsessed with this bog body that has turned up. So Lucy comes to Sarah's aid and decides to come and stay and look after her for a bit. And things kind of progress from there. There's some very gory and disturbing scenes in this that really shocked me, but in a good way. It's kind of a take on vampires, but it's slightly different, which I thought was like a really unique kind of spin on the kind of vampire trope. We have lots of horrific scenes in this. We have this kind of codependency between the sisters, and the kind of looking at the relationship between twins and sisters and how far you'll go for your family. It was such a good read. It was so compelling. I didn't know where anything was going, so it was so compulsive to read. I just had to know what was happening, what they were going to do next, and what disturbing thing was going to happen next in the story. And it also looks a lot at like women's mental health and the kind of way that women are treated. Women were treated in the kind of 1880s in Europe, and their kind of mental health, and lots of female rage, I feel like, as well. It very much touches on the female rage, which, you know, enraged me too in the way that they were treated. But I thought it was such an interesting and unique read, and that's why it's in my second place. Okay, and then my top read of 2025 is Bat Eater by Kylie Baker. This follows Cora, who's a crime scene cleaner in New York, and during the pandemic, Cora witnesses the murder of her sister, who gets pushed in front of a train, basically right in front of her eyes. And I believe that they say the word Bat Eater, which implies that it was a racially motivated attack, as Bat Eater is like a slur that's used against Asian people. As Cora's working as a crime scene cleaner, she starts to notice a pattern in the murders that she's basically cleaning up, and they all seem to be targeting Asian people, specifically I think Asian women, and she starts to question whether there is a kind of link between her sister's murder and the murders that seem to be happening at the moment. So needless to say, this is a horror, and it also deals a lot with like social commentary on racism and the way that people are treated, and the way that kind of people are treated in terms of murders and police, and the way that those kind of situations are dealt with. But it also blends in this kind of paranormal element, which I feel like the combination of the horror, the like gore from the crime scenes, the social commentary, and these paranormal kind of supernatural elements, and also these kind of like Chinese traditions that are kind of included in there, I feel like makes for such a unique book that just has taken my top spot. I feel like it was so unique and different from anything I've read, and I loved the way that Kylie Lee Baker kind of blended all of these elements together so well. It probably helps that social commentary, horror, like they're two of my favorite things and two of the things that I find myself drawn the most to. So I mean, that might explain why this is at the top. I love Kylie Lee Baker's writing and her ability to kind of create these horrific moments as well as dealing with a social commentary and including all of these different elements in the novel. I also really loved the characterization and Cora's colleagues in this, who are kind of flawed and a little bit strange, but so I came to really like them, and I got really invested in them and their lives. And we also get to see like their backstory, how they've come to be crime scene cleaners too, and like the kind of backstory of their lives. And I felt really invested in the characters. I really liked, and I also really liked the kind of like supernatural elements and the Chinese traditions of the Hungry Ghost Festival. I feel like it was a really interesting and unique way to like incorporate a look at grief in here alongside keeping the horror elements. I thought that was so unique and so interesting, and just kept me reading because I didn't know what was going to happen, and I was always kind of like questioning what was real and what was going on in this. And I thought it was a really good way at looking at the kind of complex emotions around grief, kind of keeping within the horror genre. So yes, that's my favourite book of the year. And that brings us to the end of my favourite books of 2025. Let me know what your favourite book of 2025 was in the comments. And if you've read any of these, let me know your thoughts. If there's any of these on your TBR, also let me know. And let me know if any of these sound interesting to you, or if you're going to pick any of these up or add them to your TBR. So yes, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what your favourite book of 2025 was, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!